noticed that returning vets, the transition to civilian life.
At 77, Joe Walsh finally breaks the silence. After decades of whispers in fan circles, after message boards wondered aloud and magazines speculated in cryptic headlines, the truth about his relationship with Don Henley is out in the open. And it's not what many longtime Eagles fans had pictured. It's more complicated, more human, and far more revealing. For years, the story was reduced to rumor. Tales of feuds, reconciliations, creative clashes, even silent estrangements. Now, Walsh has confirmed what really happened, and the picture he paints changes everything. But before we get to the truth, we have to go back to where it all began. Before any of the headlines, before the hotel room myths and the stadium anthems, there was a boy in Wichita, Kansas, who picked up a guitar almost like it was fate. Joe Walsh was born in 1947, and like so many kids of the post-war boom, he was raised on the sound of the radio. The glow of tube amplifiers, the hum of vinyl records, and the wild promise of rock and roll caught his imagination early. By the time his family relocated to Ohio, Walsh was already shaping the sound that would one day cut across arenas filled with thousands. What set him apart wasn't just technical skill. It was curiosity. He reportedly spent hours not just practicing chords, but also dismantling radios and guitars, learning how the pieces fit, how wires carried sound, how electronics could bend tone. That instinct to take something apart and reimagine it later showed up in the wild experiments that made his guitar voice instantly recognizable. Still, the shy young man wasn't yet the freewheeling personality fans came to know. By all accounts, Walsh was introverted in his early years, a kid who stood on the outside looking in. But here's the truth. That distance gave him perspective. He studied people, studied sound, and when it came time to step on stage, he knew how to transform himself. Before the Eagles, before Don Henley's careful perfectionism, there was the James Gang. That first breakout moment, songs like Funk Myra 49 still roar through classic rock radio today, gave Walsh his first taste of stardom. Suddenly, the kid who once tinkered alone in his room was on stage, crafting riffs that audiences could not forget. Then, everything changed. Fame arrived fast, but so did pressure. And as Walsh's career rose, another figure entered his orbit. Don Henley, the disciplined Texas drummer whose voice would soon define an era. On paper, Walsh and Henley couldn't have been more different. Walsh was wild, spontaneous, unpredictable. His humor and eccentric energy made him the life of every backstage corridor. Henley, on the other hand, was measured, precise, known for his perfectionism and his guarded way of moving through the industry. If you watched closely, you could almost see the creative sparks fly when the two of them were in the same room. The Eagles became a crucible for both personalities. To fans, it looked effortless. Hit after hit, harmonies tighter than steel strings, albums that seemed carved in stone. But behind the cameras, the story was different. Henley reportedly pushed for polish, order, and control, while Walsh was said to bring chaos, experimentation, and an irreverent spirit that kept the band alive. And that's when the whispers started. Fans wondered, were Henley and Walsh allies or adversaries? Was their relationship built on respect or rivalry? According to insiders, both were true at once. There were nights when Walsh's unpredictability frustrated Henley to no end. There were also nights when Henley leaned on Walsh's energy to break the tension that threatened to fracture the band. The contrast defined the Eagles' peak years. When Henley's lyrics leaned serious and brooding, Walsh's riffs punched light through the heaviness. Together, they built something neither could have done alone. But here's where it gets complicated. Creative chemistry rarely mirrors personal ease. By the late 70s, as Hotel California reached mythic heights, tensions across the band deepened. Contracts, tours, egos, it was all combustible. And while fans adored the music, the men behind it often found themselves at odds. Henley, according to longtime collaborators, expected discipline. Walsh, true to his spirit, sometimes resisted structure altogether. Yet through all of it, one thing never faded: respect. Henley reportedly admitted that Walsh's presence gave the band grit, while Walsh has long said Henley's focus anchored him when things threatened to spiral. Still, rumors refused to die. Were they still speaking? Had they fallen out? And when Walsh, at 77, finally gave his answer, it clarified decades of speculation. Then, everything changed. By the late 1970s, the Eagles were no longer just a band. They were an institution. The tours stretched endlessly, the records sold in the millions, and with every success came heavier expectation. That pressure took its toll. Joe Walsh, never one to hide his struggles, was swept into a lifestyle that was fast, volatile, and dangerous. According to those close to the band, there were nights when the fun-loving energy tipped into something darker. Henley, ever the controlled figure, reportedly found himself clashing with Walsh over priorities and discipline. Behind the polished performances, cracks widened. Long studio sessions stretched past dawn. Creative disagreements weren't just about notes and lyrics, they were about identity. Was the Eagles a carefully crafted harmony machine, or a living, breathing rock band where chaos had its place? For Walsh and Henley, that question never had a simple answer. And that's when the whispers started to grow louder. Fans speculated endlessly. Some claimed Walsh was being pushed to the margins. Others insisted Henley had turned cold. Rumors spun out of tabloid columns. Tales as of arguments, icy silences, and even total estrangement. On message boards decades later, the same question echoed. Were Joe Walsh and Don Henley even on speaking terms? Here's where it gets complicated. The truth is that both distance and closeness existed, sometimes in the same season. There were years when Walsh felt isolated, even estranged, and there were moments when Henley, in quieter interviews, described Walsh as essential to the band's soul. In reality, their relationship was layered, not a simple friendship or feud. The pivot moment came in the early 1980s. The Eagles imploded under the weight of fame, and both men walked away. Walsh dove into solo projects, bringing his signature wit and guitar voice to audiences that still adored him. Henley, meanwhile, crafted solo albums that critics hailed as some of the decade's most literate pop. But here's the truth. Their paths never fully separated. Reports from the period suggest that even when they weren't playing together, the bond wasn't entirely broken. Yet the absence only fueled more rumors. Were they enemies? Had egos destroyed everything? By the time the Eagles finally reunited in 1994, the questions had only multiplied. Now, if you're wondering what was confirmed, this is where Walsh, at 77, stepped forward. In recent conversations, Walsh made it clear, yes, he and Henley had their clashes. Yes, the tension was real. But no, it was never hatred. According to Walsh, their relationship has always been a balance, creative friction that at times spilled into personal distance, but never a total break. He described Henley as demanding but brilliant, someone who kept the music alive when others might have given up. And Walsh admitted something else. Without Henley's rigor, his own wild energy might have burned out too soon. It was, in his own words, a kind of creative tension marriage. Not always easy, but deeply significant. Let's be clear about what's confirmed and what isn't. Walsh hasn't detailed every conflict. He's never aired private arguments in public. What he has confirmed is that, despite the rumors, he and Henley remain connected. They are not inseparable best friends, but they are bound by music, by history, and by a strange kind of mutual respect. As of October 3, 2025, there's no public record of a complete falling out. There are no statements of enmity. There is acknowledgement of difficulty and of gratitude. The fallout from Walsh's admission rippled through fans immediately. Longtime followers who feared there had been permanent bitterness expressed relief online. Some wrote that it helped them see the Eagles' story in a new light, not as a tale of feuds, but as a human story of two very different men navigating fame together. Others admitted surprise. The myth of a bitter rivalry had become so entrenched that hearing the truth felt almost shocking. Behind the headlines, the reality was quieter. Walsh and Henley still shared the stage on reunion tours. They stood side by side in tribute concerts, and even when they weren't in constant contact, they found a way to honor the music that had outlived every rumor. So, where do things stand now? Walsh, still sharp, still funny, has settled into a rhythm of selective public appearances, family life, and careful creative projects. Henley, ever the private figure, continues his own path. By all accounts, when they do meet, it is with mutual acknowledgement of a bond forged in fire. But the bigger story is this: what their relationship teaches us about art and human connection. Can two men so different, one wild, one precise, sustain a partnership across decades? Isn't that the real miracle behind the music? Before we close, one more reflection. When Walsh confirmed the truth, he didn't end the rumors. He reframed them. What had been painted as rivalry was revealed as something richer: respect, friction, brotherhood in its own unusual shape. If Joe Walsh or this story meant something to you, tell me one memory below. The moment you won't forget. Was it a guitar solo that made you stop in your tracks? A Henley lyric that cut to the bone? Be kind, be specific, and take care of each other. Behind the cameras, the story was always different. To the public, Joe Walsh and Don Henley embodied a seamless machine. The Eagles, the band that could do no wrong. Yet when you looked closer, there was always a contrast. Walsh's laugh, his easy way of throwing chaos into a room, seemed to bounce against Henley's steely calm. And that contrast became the root of both their friction and their genius. Here's where it gets complicated. After the band's 1994 reunion, fans assumed everything had healed. They saw the sold-out tours, the polished performances, and they thought the wounds of the past had been buried. But if you listened carefully, even in interviews from that era, Walsh sometimes let slip hints of strain. He would joke about Henley's perfectionism, or how every detail had to pass under Henley's eye. And Henley, in turn, would mention Walsh's unpredictable nature in a way that wasn't unkind, but carried an edge. And that's when the whispers started again. Online forums speculated, were they just colleagues forced together by the lure of money? Did they travel separately? Were they even friendly offstage? According to crew members, there were nights when Walsh and Henley barely exchanged words until the lights came on. Yet there were also reports of laughter, shared toasts after a show, and quiet conversations that never made the headlines. The truth, as always, was more complicated than the rumor. Then, everything changed once more. Walsh faced personal crises that could have ended his career. In candid moments, he has spoken about addiction and the hard road back. According to Walsh, Henley was one of the voices who quietly encouraged his recovery. He didn't broadcast it, didn't write press statements about it, but behind the curtain, he showed up. For fans who believed their relationship was only about tension, that revelation reframed the entire story. Let's be clear about what's confirmed and what isn't. What Walsh has publicly shared is that Henley's support mattered during some of his darkest times. What he has not done is detail every moment or suggest they were inseparable friends. Instead, the picture he paints is layered. Two men who could clash fiercely in one season and extend quiet grace in another. The fallout of that admission has been significant. Many fans wrote online that they'd underestimated Henley's role in Walsh's life, painting him only as the perfectionist taskmaster. Others said it deepened their respect for Walsh, because admitting to tension, while also acknowledging gratitude, requires humility. By all accounts, the narrative of bitter enemies no longer holds. Still, corrections were needed. No, Walsh never left the Eagles because of Henley. No, they didn't spend decades in complete silence. Yes, they took breaks, sometimes years, but those breaks were part of the band's rhythm, not proof of permanent estrangement. And no, Henley did not exile Walsh to the background. If anything, Henley often insisted Walsh's guitar tone was indispensable to the Eagles' sound. Now, if you're wondering where things stand today, here's what we know. As of October 3rd, 2025, Walsh is living more quietly than in the past. He still performs selectively, often at benefit concerts or special appearances. He spends time with his family, and his humor remains intact. Fans who have met him recently describe him as gracious, self-effacing, and still sharp. Henley, too, has stepped back from constant touring, focusing on chosen projects and the preservation of the Eagles' legacy. When they appear together, the respect is visible. There may not be daily phone calls or constant companionship, but there is acknowledgement, a bond that time has not erased. So what is the legacy here? For one, it teaches us that creative partnerships are rarely simple. What the public reads as feud can just as easily be the friction that fuels greatness. Walsh's free spirit gave the Eagles electricity. Henley's precision gave them structure. Without both, the music might never have endured. Isn't that the real story? The way differences create something larger than either person could manage alone? The takeaways are profound. Walsh's honesty about his struggles, coupled with his acknowledgement of Henley's support, remind us that relationships can be messy yet meaningful. Even amid clashes, there can be respect. Even in distance, there can be quiet solidarity. The myth of perfect harmony doesn't hold. But perhaps the messiness is more authentic, more human, and more inspiring. And so, as Joe Walsh at 77 finally confirms the truth, fans see a fuller picture. Not enemies, not saints, but two men who weathered storms, made music that defined an era, and learned, sometimes painfully, sometimes gracefully, what it means to share a stage and a legacy. If Joe Walsh or Don Henley touched your life through their music, I'd love to hear your story. What song carried you through a hard season? What moment from their concerts still lives in your memory? Share it below. Be kind, be thoughtful, and let's honor the humanity behind the music. Before we dive into the close, we need to pause on something important. Legacy isn't just about chart positions or ticket sales. Legacy is about how people remember you when the lights dim. For Joe Walsh and Don Henley, that memory is layered, sometimes contradictory, but always powerful. Consider Walsh's legacy first. He was the jester, the trickster, the unpredictable spark who could pick up a guitar and turn a room upside down. His riffs weren't just technical feats, they were bursts of personality, streaks of wild color across the canvas of the Eagles' music. For decades, fans have recalled his solos as the moments that turned concerts into catharsis. Yet Walsh also carried the weight of struggle, something he has never hidden. And in the honesty of his admissions, in the courage to say he stumbled and found his way back, he gave fans something more than music. He gave them a blueprint for resilience. Henley, on the other hand, embodied discipline. His voice, with its solemn gravity, gave the band gravitas. His lyrics cut deep, confronting politics, love, mortality. Without Henley's seriousness, the Eagles might have floated away on their own success. He grounded them, anchored the vision, and in doing so, sometimes clashed with Walsh's freewheeling nature. But together, the two created a balance. One provided the electricity, the other gave it form. Isn't that, in the end, the essence of lasting art? Tension between opposites that somehow produces harmony. And that brings us back to Walsh's confirmation at 77. By finally speaking candidly, he reframed years of speculation. He didn't tell a story of bitter enemies, nor did he romanticize an unbroken friendship. He told the truth as it was. A complicated relationship marked by respect, strain, and survival. And that honesty may be his greatest gift to fans, reminding them that behind the myths, behind the headlines, real people live out messy, imperfect connections. Behind the cameras, the story was always different. The world saw stadium anthems and perfect harmonies. Inside, there were arguments, reconciliations, and long silences. And yet, through it all, there was endurance. The Eagles never ceased to matter, in large part because Walsh and Henley, so different in style, never stopped completing each other musically. Then, everything changed once again in the 21st century. Time softened some of the edges. The urgency of youth faded, replaced by reflection. Walsh, grateful for recovery and stability, spoke more openly about his appreciation for the people who stood by him. Henley, known for his guarded manner, occasionally let slip moments of warmth. Fans who saw the band in the later years witnessed not just music, but reconciliation, an unspoken acknowledgement that their shared history mattered more than any old wound. So, where does that leave us today? Walsh, at 77, continues to inspire with humor and humility. He appears at benefits, offers mentorship, and embraces the quieter pace of life. Henley, too, walks a path of selectivity and preservation, guarding the Eagles' legacy with care. Together, even in their silences, they remain part of each other's story. And here's the truth. Legacy isn't clean. It's messy, jagged, full of contradictions. Walsh and Henley's partnership shows us that the greatest art often comes from people who don't fit neatly together, but somehow need one another. What's left for fans is not just music, but a lesson that differences can coexist, that tension can give rise to beauty, that even fractured relationships can leave behind something whole. One last rhetorical question. When you sing along to Life in the Fast Lane or Desperado, do you hear rivalry? Or do you hear two men pushing each other towards something greater than themselves? Now, if you're wondering what to take from this story, take this. Walsh's confirmation reminds us that human bonds rarely fit the myths we create. They are messier, richer, and ultimately more meaningful. And sometimes the truth is far better than the rumor. As we close, remember this. Joe Walsh finally confirmed the truth about Don Henley, not to settle gossip, but to reveal humanity, not to stir drama, but to show respect. At 77, he framed their story as one of survival, gratitude, and the strange alchemy that made music history. If Joe Walsh, Don Henley, or the Eagles have ever been part of your soundtrack, I invite you to share your memory. Was it the first time you heard Hotel California and felt the world pause? Was it a Walsh riff that made you laugh in sheer delight? Or a Henley lyric that left you in quiet thought? Be specific, be kind, and honor the men behind the myth, because legacies live on when we carry them forward. Take care of one another.